"You're not welcome here," the bar owner snarled, his voice thick with disdain as he jabbed a finger toward the door. Jack Delaney sat silently in the corner, his beer untouched, his presence calm. He hadn't spoken to a soul, hadn't moved an inch beyond the bar stool, just watched quietly, like a man searching for peace in a world that no longer made sense. "Rowdy," the owner repeated, spitting the word like a curse. Jack looked up, steady and unflinching. "I haven't even finished my drink." But that didn't matter. What mattered was the look in his eyes, the quiet stillness, the unspoken strength, and that, to some, was threatening enough. He stood, no anger, no raised voice, just a quiet exit into the cold night. But what happened the next afternoon? When 12 men stepped out of 3 black vans and crossed the street in absolute silence, wasn't just retaliation. It was remembrance. It was loyalty, wrapped in the stillness of boots on concrete and the weight of a brotherhood that never fades. Because when the world turns its back on one of them, the rest turn to face it. If you still believe in dignity earned in silence, type honor in the comments. And stay, because this story doesn't ask for your attention. It earns it. And if this already speaks to something deep inside you, then maybe, just maybe, you belong with us. Jack Delaney was 51 years old, though his face bore the miles of a man who had lived through more than most men twice his age. His frame was lean, shoulders squared not from pride but from discipline. He kept his silver-streaked hair clipped short beneath a worn baseball cap, his jaw lined with stubble that spoke of someone who didn't bother with razors unless he had a reason. His eyes, steel gray and deeply set, never stopped scanning, not with suspicion, but with a quiet awareness that couldn't be shut off. He didn't move fast, didn't speak loud, and never asked for anything he couldn't earn. There was a stillness to him, the kind that made people either curious or uncomfortable. Jack had one habit he never broke, no matter the town, no matter the day. Every morning at 7:00 a.m. sharp, he'd walk 3 blocks to the old pier, black coffee in hand, and sit on the same wooden bench facing the water. He didn't speak. He didn't scroll his phone. He just watched the waves and listened. That was his ritual, his version of church. Now he lived alone in a rented room above a bait and tackle shop in the harbor town of Bay Haven. It smelled of salt and oil and rusted anchors. The room was small, neat, and silent, with nothing on the walls except an old photo of his SEAL team. 12 faces, all younger then, some now gone. He had no family nearby, no job yet, just a backpack, a pair of boots, and a duffel bag that had been with him through Afghanistan, Iraq, Somalia, and places too classified to name. He had served for 15 years in the United States Navy SEALs, completed 4 tours, and carried 2 bullet scars across his ribs that he never spoke of. Honorably discharged after an injury that damaged the cartilage in his right knee. Something about jumping out of a helicopter at the wrong angle during a night op in Kandahar. But that wasn't what changed him. What changed him was coming home, and realizing the world didn't seem to notice. To the townspeople of Bay Haven, Jack was just another loner, another ex-military guy trying to figure things out. They saw his quiet as distance, his precision as coldness. No one asked what he'd done. No one thanked him. No one even looked twice. Until one Tuesday night, when he walked into the Iron Marlin bar, just looking for a quiet place to drink. He sat in the corner, still as a statue, eyes on the nautical map tacked to the far wall. That's when the bartender glanced at him, whispered something to the owner. And the owner frowned, long and hard. It was the kind of look a man gives when he's already made up his mind. Something was coming. Jack didn't know what yet, but he'd felt this kind of tension before. Not in a bar. In a war zone. And tension like that always broke. The Iron Marlin wasn't crowded that night. Just a few locals, slouched over whiskey and cheap beer, the air thick with fried grease and stale conversation. Jack Delaney stepped in quietly, the way a man does when he's not trying to be noticed. He paused just inside the door, scanned the room once, a soft habit of muscle memory, then made his way to a corner booth beneath a faded map of the Gulf Coast. He didn't take off his cap. He didn't look around again. He simply nodded to the bartender, ordered a single bottle of Budweiser, and let the silence do what it did best. Keep him company. He had been sitting there for 20 minutes, maybe 30, barely sipping his beer, not saying a word to anyone, when the owner finally decided to make a scene. Frank Rizzo was a broad, heavy man whose voice always seemed to arrive before he did. He marched over, arms crossed over his chest, like a man ready to deliver a verdict. "You've been sitting there staring long enough," he said loudly, his tone sharp enough to slice through the murmurs of the bar. "You casing the joint or something?" Jack looked up, calm. "Just enjoying my beer. Thinking." "Yeah, well, I don't like that kind of thinking in my bar," Frank snapped. "Makes folks nervous." He gestured broadly, though no one in the bar was paying them any mind. If anything, eyes slid away the moment Jack's gaze swept near. Jack didn't flinch. "My kind?" he asked softly. Frank leaned closer, his breath heavy with cigarettes and stale bourbon. "Yeah, your kind. Quiet. Watching. Ex-military, I bet. You guys think you're better than everybody. Always looking for a fight. Well, not in here. Not on my watch. No." "Oh." Jack set his bottle down gently, the glass clicking softly against the table. "I haven't said a word. Haven't moved from this seat." "I don't care," Frank growled. "You people are all the same. Too much attitude, too much edge. This is a respectable place, and you're not welcome." The bartender looked away. One patron took a long sip from his glass without blinking. Another picked up his phone and scrolled, pretending he hadn't heard. No one spoke. No one stood up. No. The silence wasn't just quiet. It was complicity. Jack stood slowly, his every movement measured, deliberate. He pushed in his chair. He didn't argue. Didn't raise his voice. Didn't threaten. He reached into his pocket, placed a $5 bill on the table, more than the beer was worth, and said, "Keep the change." He hadn't even finished the bottle, but he left it there, nearly full, like a ritual interrupted. As he turned to leave, Frank barked one last insult. "And don't come back, you hear? We don't need your trouble." Jack didn't look back, but he stopped just outside the door, pulled out his phone, and tapped a message into a secure app, one used only by the men who knew what it meant to bleed and survive together. He typed with one thumb, calm and steady, "Iron Marlin Bar, Decho. Owner, Frank Rizzo. Disrespectful. Hostile. Want? Just Fi Jack." He hit send, and inside, Frank Rizzo smiled, like a man who thought he'd won something. But outside, the wind shifted slightly, and the air began to tighten, like the breath the town didn't know it was holding. Because sometimes, the quietest exits leave behind the loudest echoes. It was exactly 3:07 p.m. the following afternoon when the first black van turned the corner onto Dockside Avenue. No music, no roar of engine, just the low, steady hum of military-grade precision. Then, a second van, then a third, all unmarked, matte finish, moving with synchronized silence like shadows across asphalt. They didn't park, they positioned, wheels aligned, doors facing the Iron Marlin. And for the first time in a long time, Frank Rizzo, who'd just stepped outside to light a cigarette, felt something he couldn't name tighten in his gut. The doors slid open in unison. 12 men stepped out, not rushed, not loud, but deliberate. Every one of them tall, broad, and hard in the way time and training make you. Civilian clothes, sure, jeans, boots, t-shirts, ball caps. But nothing about them said civilian. Their eyes didn't search. They locked. Their bodies didn't sway. They held. Leading them was a man with the weight of command in his gait. Travis Bear Ross. Senior Chief Petty Officer, retired. Jack's team leader through more operations than anyone dared count. His jaw was tight, carved in discipline. His steps, slow and centered, landed like he was measuring the earth beneath him. His hands stayed loose by his sides, but his presence was anything but casual. Boots like anchors, shoulders squared to the wind, and eyes like steel, gray, calculating, unblinking. They crossed the street without a word, a loose formation that didn't need rehearsing. Like wolves stepping into a clearing. Frank froze halfway through his first drag. The cigarette trembled between his fingers. Inside the bar, the bartender watched through the smudged window, instinctively reaching to lower the volume on the jukebox. Every conversation died mid-sentence. A man near the back slowly set down his glass, as if unsure whether to hide or kneel. They didn't knock. They didn't yell. They just entered. 12 men. No hesitation. No fanfare. Just presence. Travis stepped in first. He didn't scan the room. He didn't need to. His gaze locked on Frank Rizzo, who stood slack-jawed by the door, trying to remember how to breathe. The rest of the team fanned out, not aggressively, but unmistakably. Flanking walls. Claiming space. Blocking exits without ever seeming to. No introduction. No theatrics. Just gravity. Travis stopped 3 feet from Frank. Not close enough to threaten. Just close enough to command. His voice, when it came, was low, even, and cut like a straight-edged blade. Which one of you told him to leave? Frank's lips parted, but no sound came out. His eyes flicked to the bartender, to the patrons, to the exit, but no help was coming. No words arrived. Just a shallow breath, caught in his throat. Behind Travis, one of the larger men, Tank, they called him, shifted slightly, cracking his neck with a slow, deliberate roll, as if preparing for something inevitable. And in that moment, the temperature of the room dropped. Not because of air, but because of certainty. The kind of certainty that precedes storms. No one needed an introduction. Everyone knew what came next. Frank Rizzo tried to straighten his spine, but something in his shoulders gave him away. Maybe it was the way he held his breath too long. Maybe it was how his eyes kept darting to the man in front of him, then to the 11 others who stood like sentinels, unmoved, unblinking. But he smiled anyway, a weak, oil-slick smirk meant to cover cracks in concrete. "Now look," he said, hands open as if to show he had nothing to hide. "This is just a misunderstanding. Guy came in last night, gave off a weird vibe. I didn't know he was one of yours." Travis Ross didn't blink. He didn't even shift his weight. His voice, when it came, was like cold water sliding across steel. "His name is Jack Delaney. He served under me. And you didn't get a weird vibe, Mr. Rizzo. You made a judgment." Frank scoffed, tried for a chuckle, but it came out thin. "You military types, always so dramatic. I run a bar, not a courtroom. Sometimes you go with your gut." Behind Travis, the man they called Doc stepped forward silently, opened a worn leather folder, and held up a single sheet. Jack's discharge paperwork. Official, decorated, honorable. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. Travis nodded once toward the paper, but never looked away from Frank. This man gave 15 years of his life to serve. 4 tours. 2 injuries. Not 1 complaint. All he asked for was to finish. The words didn't rise. They fell. Heavy. Final. Dot. Inside the bar, no one moved. Even the jukebox, long since silent, seemed afraid to hum. The bartender stood still behind the counter, hands clenched under the bar top. A couple by the window sat frozen, not blinking, not speaking. The air wasn't quiet. It was loaded. Frank swallowed. His tongue stuck to the roof of his mouth. Still, he tried. Okay, so maybe I was out of line. He didn't say anything, but the way he sat there. The way he sat there, Travis repeated, flat as stone. You humiliated a man in public for being quiet, for watching, for existing. Frank tried again, grasping for something he couldn't name. Look, I said I didn't know who he was. That's the point, Travis said. Then he took one step forward. Not a stomp, not a threat, just 1 inch closer. He pulled his phone from his pocket, tapped the screen, and held it up. On it, a still image. Jack standing outside the Iron Marlin, hands in pockets, eyes tired, face calm. The timestamp clear, the silence louder. You don't have to know a man to treat him with respect, Travis said. But now you do. For a moment, Frank couldn't look away. His smirk was gone. His jaw slack, eyes wide, breathing shallow. The bartender looked down. The couple turned their gaze to the floor. Not out of shame, out of instinct. No one moved. No one spoke. The bar was a tomb. And Frank Rizzo, who just the night before had shouted a man out the door, now stood still, blinking too often, shoulders slowly curling inward. He knew. The storm wasn't coming. It had arrived. Frank Rizzo stood there, shoulders caving inward, lips parted like he wanted to say something, but had forgotten how. His eyes flicked from the image on Travis's phone to the hard faces surrounding him, each one carved from silence and storm. He tried to muster a smile again, but this time it collapsed halfway, like a man laughing at his own funeral. I didn't mean it like that, he muttered. The words dry, brittle. He just looked like, it was a long day, and Travis didn't blink. He didn't move. He just turned the phone in his hand and passed it back to Doc, who stepped forward once more. Only this time, he wasn't holding a folder. He was holding a small black external drive. No labels. No commentary. Just truth. Security footage, Doc said flatly, setting the drive on the bar in front of Frank. From your own cameras. Last night. Shows Jack walking in, sitting down, saying nothing, doing nothing, until you walked over and decided to make him the problem. Frank reached for the drive like it was a live wire. He didn't plug it in. Didn't even touch it. Just stared at it. His mouth opened again, then shut. I didn't think anyone would. Most people just leave. That's the problem, Travis said quietly. Most people do. Then, something shifted. Not in the light, not in the sound, but in the air itself. From the back of the room, a single voice cut through. Soft. Young. Female. Diana. I saw it. A waitress. Barely 20. She'd been clearing glasses when they walked in. Now, her eyes were glassy, hands trembling around a tray. He didn't do anything. Just sat there, looked tired. Frank turned toward her, eyes pleading, but she looked away. Another voice joined. A man near the jukebox. Thought the same thing. He looked like someone just trying to breathe. The silence wasn't silence anymore. It was shifting. Heavy. Judging. Even the bartender, who had said nothing through it all, slowly walked to the end of the bar and turned his back. Frank began to speak, but the words tumbled, unformed. I didn't mean. It just looked like. Enough, Travis said, not loudly, but with finality. He stepped forward and placed a business card on the bar. Navy SEAL Foundation. You're going to make a donation. A public one. In Jack's name. Frank's face twitched. A donation. Travis met his eyes. Enough to make a dent in your ego. Enough to say the words you never said. Frank didn't answer. He just nodded. Small. Shaky. Like someone surrendering not out of honor, but exhaustion. And you're going to call him, Travis added. Not tomorrow. Now. He pulled his phone from his pocket, dialed, and handed it to Frank. The bar watched, breathless. Frank brought the phone to his ear, waited. Then, his voice low, broken. "Jack, this is Frank Rizzo. I owe you an apology. I was wrong. You're welcome here. Always." There was no response on the other end, just the hum of connection. But Frank's hand began to tremble. When the call ended, Travis took the phone back. The room was still. Outside, one of the SEALs opened the bar's front door. Cool air rushed in. No one moved. And Frank Rizzo, who had shouted a good man out into the night, now stood small behind his bar, surrounded not by fists, but by truth. And it cut deeper. Because sometimes the loudest punishment is knowing you were seen by everyone. And no one looked away. Jack Delaney sat on the edge of his bed when the call came. The room was quiet, except for the distant gulls outside and the soft creak of old floorboards under his boots. He didn't answer right away. He looked at the name on the screen, Frank Rizzo, and waited through the first ring. The second, then picked up, holding the phone in his palm like it was made of glass. The voice on the other end was smaller than he remembered. It stammered, apologized, invited. Jack didn't interrupt. He didn't reassure. He just listened. When it was done, there was a pause. Long. Still. Then Jack simply said, "Thank you," and ended the call. A week later, he returned. No one announced his arrival. There was no fanfare. He walked in, just as the sun was tipping into gold outside the windows. The Iron Marlin was quiet, just a low murmur of conversation, the clink of a spoon in coffee. But the moment he stepped in, the silence came naturally. Heads turned, not out of fear this time, but something closer to reverence. He wore the same boots, same jeans, same faded ball cap, daddy. But something was different. It wasn't what he wore, it was what he carried. A quiet presence, earned over years, and finally recognized. Frank Rizzo stood behind the bar. He didn't speak. He stepped forward, set down a cold bottle of Budweiser, and placed his hand flat on the counter. His eyes didn't lift, but his posture said everything. Jack nodded once. Not cold, not warm. Just enough. The bartender, who once looked the other way, now walked out from behind the bar, wiped a nearby stool, and slid it gently toward Jack without saying a word. A waitress walked by, eyes lowered, and softly placed a folded napkin beside his glass. Someone near the window stood, stepped forward, and offered a quiet handshake. No speech. No explanation. Just a gesture. Small. True. It wasn't redemption. It wasn't atonement. But it was a beginning. Jack sat in the same corner booth. The nautical chart still hung crooked on the wall. He took a sip, closed his eyes, and for the first time in a long time, the beer tasted like peace. No one asked him to speak. No one asked him to forgive. They just let him be. And in that stillness, change settled like dust on old wood. Slow. Silent. Real. A child at a nearby table asked his father, was he a soldier? The father didn't answer right away. He just looked at Jack, then nodded. He still is. Jack turned toward the window, where the sunlight caught on the American flag hanging just outside, weathered but proud. He didn't smile. He didn't need to. This place once forgot who it belonged to. Maybe now, it might start to remember. Word spread without effort. No headline. No broadcast. Just quiet conversations exchanged at barbershops, bait stands, and the back pews of old churches. People spoke softer when they mentioned his name now. Not out of fear, but out of something that sounded like reverence. The story traveled the way truths always do in small towns. Slow, steady, undeniable. A month later, the Iron Marlin changed. No grand reopening. No ceremony. But the next time Jack walked by, there was a new plaque beside the entrance, brushed bronze, small and plain. It read, "In quiet honor of those who served, with respect always." Below it, a shadow box framed with aged wood, inside a folded flag and a photo of Jack from decades earlier, standing beside his SEAL team, all of them younger, faces set against a desert sky. No names. Just the image. It was enough. Inside the bar, things were quieter now. The jukebox still played, but softer. A small bookshelf had been added near the corner booth. Military memoirs, folded letters, a guest log with handwritten entries from other veterans passing through. No one asked Jack to sign it. He never did. But his silence filled more space than words ever could. None of it was official. The town council didn't vote on it. There were no TV crews, no city seals stamped on the wall. It was done by the hands of the people who had once looked away, and now chose not to. A retired machinist built the frame for the shadow box. A high school history teacher printed off letters from former SEALs who had heard the story and mailed them in. One boy, 16, quiet, wrote an essay about Jack for a Veterans Day assignment. He didn't turn it in. He gave it to the bar. And slowly, things changed. People greeted him now with a nod that meant more than hello. Teenagers held doors without being asked. A mother once walked across the street just to whisper, "Thank you," before walking away again, eyes wet but smiling. Jack never told the story. He never corrected it, never embellished it, never claimed ownership of it. But others did. A Marine who'd lost his leg came by just to shake Jack's hand. A young woman with a military father listened to the tale, then went home and apologized to her dad. A man in town who hadn't spoken to his brother in 6 years picked up the phone because of what he'd heard. And still, Jack said nothing. He still came to the pier every morning, coffee in hand. Still wore the same boots. Still sat in the same booth at the Iron Marlin. He didn't sit taller. He didn't smile more. But the room around him leaned inward now, as if the very air had learned how to listen. One afternoon, a child asked her grandfather, "Is that the man from the story?" The grandfather looked over at Jack, his hands folded, his eyes watching the horizon beyond the bar window, and simply replied, "He is." Jack didn't turn, didn't react, but he reached forward, adjusted the napkin under his drink, and glanced once toward the photo on the wall, toward the man he used to be, and the brothers who still stood with him, in memory if not in presence. No flag needed to wave. No music needed to rise. Only a silence that stayed, and meant something. They sat at the corner table near the window, where the light always came in soft and sideways in the late afternoon. No one disturbed them. No one stared. 2 mugs of coffee rested between them, black, no sugar, slowly steaming as if the warmth alone was enough to say what words couldn't. Outside, the tide moved in and out like breath. And inside, the only sound was the occasional clink of a spoon against ceramic, and the low hum of a vinyl record, playing something older than either of them wanted to admit. Jack didn't speak first. He rarely did. But when he finally looked up, his eyes found Travis's, not searching, not heavy, just steady. "You didn't have to come," Jack said. Travis shrugged. A slow motion, not dismissive, just true. "Didn't come for you," he said softly. "Came for the silence you didn't deserve." Jack didn't answer. He just reached for his coffee, lifted it halfway, then paused. Travis did the same. 2 men who had once led others through fire and into fog, now sitting across from each other like farmers on a porch, as if the weight of their pasts could be shouldered with caffeine and time. There were no uniforms, no medals, just creased hands and tired eyes, and the kind of posture you don't unlearn, even when you try. After a while, Travis pulled something from his jacket pocket. A cap, toddy, faded, frayed at the edges, the stitching half undone. SEAL team insignia, barely visible on the brim. He slid it across the table without a word. Jack looked down at it, fingers tracing the worn edge. Then, without hesitation, he took off his own cap, just a plain navy blue, and placed the other on his head. It didn't fit perfectly, but it didn't need to. Across the room, the jukebox clicked to the next song, an old Johnny Cash track, low and grainy. Neither man commented. They just let it play. A waitress came by, not their regular one. Young, nervous. She refilled the mugs, set a small plate of lemon pie between them, and smiled awkwardly before retreating without a word. Jack broke a piece off with his fork, pushed the plate slightly toward Travis. Travis took the gesture for what it was and nodded. "You ever think we'd be sitting like this?" Jack asked. Travis looked out the window. The flag outside swayed gently in the ocean breeze. "No," he said, "but I'm glad we are." No big moment followed. No hug. No handshake. Just silence. A silence with weight. A silence that healed without asking permission. When they finished their coffee, Jack stood first. Travis followed. Neither rushed. At the door, Jack paused, looked over his shoulder. Not at the bar, not at the plaque, not even at the faces watching them from behind their drinks, but at Travis. And he said, barely above a whisper, "Thanks for reminding them." Travis gave one small nod. Then the two men stepped out into the golden light, side by side, the door swinging shut behind them with the softest thud, as if even it knew to close gently. You didn't have to look far to see it. Just listen, just pay attention. At the elementary school down the road, a teacher paused her history lesson and told her students, "There's a man who lives just 3 blocks from here, and he taught this town something our books never could." In the corner barbershop, where clippers buzzed and sports radio once filled the silence, the shop owner pinned a photo of Frank above the register. No caption, no frame, just tape on the edges and the quiet understanding that it belonged there. At the library, an elderly woman asked for help printing a short story. Not hers, but one her grandson had written. The Man Who Never Raised His Voice. Teenagers stopped skating near the memorial plaque, taking off their caps when passing by. One of them, eyes down, fixed a crooked flagpole outside the post office without saying a word. At church, Father Delaney, no relation, added a single line to his Sunday sermon. If your strength makes others feel safe, not small, then you've known honor. There was no applause, just a soft rustle of coats and a few tears quickly wiped away. Frank, of course, said nothing. He didn't see the photo in the barbershop. He didn't hear the boy whisper to his grandfather, "I want to be like him." He didn't know that across town. His name had become something people lowered their voices to say, not out of fear, but respect. He didn't need to know. He just kept walking the same path every morning, same beat-up boots, same pace, same nod to the flag across the street. It wasn't about being remembered. It was about being worthy of remembering. And somehow, through no plan of his own, Frank became the kind of man whose story others felt compelled to tell. Not because he asked, not because he demanded, but because he endured. By the end of that month, a small wooden bench appeared beneath the tall elm tree outside the old bar. No ceremony, no plaque. Just 2 words carved in quiet tribute. He stayed. And one evening, as the wind stirred the last leaves of fall, a boy no older than 10 stood before it, hand on heart, saying nothing at all. Because sometimes the loudest legacy is the one whispered from one soul to the next. The bar never spoke of it again, but no one ever forgot. Not the way Frank stood up that day. Not with his fists, but with the silence of a man who'd already survived 1,000 storms. The jukebox never turned back on. The flag by the window was never taken down again. And Frank? He just sat in that corner booth each morning, same cup of black coffee, same old jacket, nodding once to those who passed, as if saying, "You're seen." Above the bar now hangs a small plaque. Brass, dot, weathered. It says only, "He stayed." And people do. They pause. They lower their voices. Some touch their hearts. Not out of duty, but out of something deeper. One afternoon a boy asked, "Sir, why didn't you say anything that day?" Frank didn't look up. Just said, "Sometimes you don't have to." If this story moved something in you, if it made you feel something quiet but real, tell us in the comments below. And if you believe there are still stories worth standing up for, even in silence, subscribe now. We tell them here every week.